Welcome to the Finance Committee of November 17th, the Finance Committee meeting of November 17th, 2022. I call it to order. The first item on our agenda, I would like to welcome Mr. Gene Budenhagen, who is filling a vacancy that happened in the committee because of a resignation. Welcome, Gene. Gene has many years of experience on the Finance Committee from the past, and we look forward to his great expertise and help on moving forward. So, Gene,
Thank you.
please, could you introduce yourself to
Well, I'll
everyone?
just give you a little background. I've been in town all my life. Born and grew up, went to school here. I've went out into the big world. I was an engineer for 25 years, and then I came back and I ran a business here in town for the last 25 years, and I still have a small business in town right at the present time. I've sat on the Personnel Board. I've sat on the Finance Committee for over 20 years. And just recently, I've sat on the DEI Committee, along with a couple of members here. And it's been a great experience. It's a great town, and I kind of look forward to working with you.
Thank you, Gene. On behalf of the committee, we welcome you and thank you for your
thank you.
participation. The next item on the agenda is the accepting of the minutes of October 6, 2022. Are there any comments or questions about the minutes that were recorded and posted on the Google Drive? If not, do I have a motion to accept the minutes?
So moved. Second.
All in favor of the motion to accept the minutes of October 6, 2022, please say aye.
Aye.
All not in favor, please say nay. The motion passes. We shall now move to the next item on the agenda, which is the town manager's report. Mr. Mizikar.
Great. Good evening, members of the Finance Committee. Pleased to be joined here this evening by Alex Martinez, Assistant to the Town Manager, Management Analyst to my right, and David Snowden, Assistant to the Assistant Town Manager for Administration and Finance. We're happy to walk through a couple things for you tonight. Alex will start off by reviewing local receipts, which you have in front of you, and just provide an update to you on that. So, Alex.
Thank you. So the local receipts before you are receipts collected through October. You'll see that we've collected $2,641,930, which is approximately 22% of all budgeted local receipts. Just a couple categories to highlight. In other excise hotel and other excise meal, we've collected 33% in both of those categories. We've collected almost 50% in penalties and interest, and we've collected about 42% in licenses and permits as well. So just a few categories to highlight, and we look to be in pretty good shape.
Any questions from the committee? Any comments?
I have one. How does this compare to last year's collection percentage at this time? Are we on target? Are we ahead of target?
Through October of last year, we had collected 21.55%. So we're pretty close.
Yep.
Any other questions or follow-ups?
Okay, great. We'll shift over to the main part of the meeting this evening that we have, which is the review of the fiscal year 24 revenue manual. This is always the first step in the budget process where we do a historical analysis that Alex conducted of our revenues over the last 8 years or so. We look at trends, mainly look at trends within local receipts and apply statutory formulas to our other revenue categories where most appropriate, and determine the initial available revenues that we anticipate for use in the fiscal year 24 budget process. The budget process itself will get underway in earnest in early December, and ultimately The first phase of it will be whenever I present to the Finance Committee fiscal projection 1, which is the first iteration of the budget, and that needs to be done 90 days in advance of the scheduling of annual town meeting, and we anticipate doing that in early February of this year. So I intend to walk through the major categories of revenue and dive into some of the subcategories. I encourage you to ask any questions that you have along the way. We want to make sure that everyone has a foundational understanding of the resources that we'll have, and then we can, move forward with the rest of the budget process. So we'll start off with a high-level overview of all available funds and compare them to the fiscal year 23 budget, which is the current year. So in total, we're projecting $171,032,546 to be available for use and appropriation through the sources that have been identified. This is slightly higher than the $166.7 million that we're using in the current budget. Just a couple reminders on the FY23 budget. We did not raise to the maximum allowable levy limit. There's about $210,000 in excess capacity that was left in order to provide some tax relief to taxpayers in accordance with the request of the Select Board. The tax levy, as you'll see, has been increased for both the provisions that are provided by Proposition 2.5, starting with the maximum allowable levy for fiscal year 23, increasing at 2.5%, and then adding $955,000 in new growth. The tax levy number that's here, which we'll detail, also includes debt service. Our second largest revenue category, which we'll detail, is state aid. Then we have utility revenue coming in from our various utilities: water, sewer, stormwater, solid waste. Local receipts, which we'll spend a little bit of time on because it's our most elastic revenue source, subject to the influence of general economic conditions. Free cash, which will detail the total amount that we have in free cash and our planned use. Free cash is a one-time revenue source. It's not recurring, so we want to minimize the use of that, and I think we're doing sufficient there. It's only about 1.5% of the total revenue that we do plan to use, and the vast majority of that will be on one-time expenditures. We'll talk about the levy reduction and other available funds when we get there. It'll just be a little bit easier to detail.
I don't think you're sharing.
Oh, we're not sharing. Thank you. Appreciate that.
So Kevin, does inflation have any impact on our budget forecast for 2024?
Not really on the revenue side of things. We can talk a little bit about how it may influence some of the local receipts, but definitely not in the tax levy or anything like that.
And what about our expenses?
Definitely will impact our expenses. Yep. All right. So, sorry for the detail, but really that's the purpose of our conversation this evening, is to get into the details of the revenue. This is kind of the most detailed that we'll get into them, but happy to answer questions throughout the budget process. With regards to the base tax levy, again, this includes, we start with a maximum allowable levy for the fiscal year 23 or whatever the prior year is. And as I noted, we did not raise to the maximum levy for fiscal year 23, so it's actually, we start with a base of a little over $94 million. We increased that by 2.5%, and then we added $955,000 in estimated new growth. I will remind you that actual new growth in fiscal year 23 was 1.6 million. That number was strongly influenced by construction projects, mainly the Market Basket area, and that project is certainly wrapping up, and a lot of its value is already being accounted for. But there is a lot of interest in permits and other developments, so we do think that new growth will be strong again in fiscal year '24, but we don't want to be too aggressive at the outset of the budget process and put ourselves in a position where we'd ever have to back revenues out and adjust the amount that we have for expenditure. So once we move beyond the base tax levy, which comes in from property taxation and commercial, industrial, personal property taxes, we move into what's known as the excluded levy. The excluded levy includes all funds that we're allowed to raise outside of Proposition 2.5 because we've sought a debt exclusion to cover the debt service for particular projects. Of course, those projects are listed out here on the screen. This includes all debt that's necessary that has been excluded and the associated debt service with it. So our highest single project, of course, is the Beal Early Childhood Center, where we'll service almost $3.9 million worth of debt. And that's a declining debt service schedule. As you can see, that project has already shed almost $400,000 in total debt from the first year that it hit the books in fiscal year '21. That's how we develop our debt schedule, so we provide ongoing reductions and opportunity for future investments within the models that we use. We're also bringing on the full principal and interest for the second borrowing for the police station construction project, where in fiscal year '23 we only had interest. So in total, you'll see a couple reductions where under previous statutory models, we reduced any funds that came in over the principal asking amount or the par value of the bond, and we spread that out over the life of the bond. We no longer do that. So we reduced the total amount that's due by about another $41,500, and we'll raise $9,582,202 additional dollars beyond the base tax levy to cover our debt service. Again, bringing the total number to almost $107 million will be raised through property taxes for the fiscal year. So certainly our largest category. All our calculations here are based upon statutory formula and allowances. And our new growth estimate, I feel, is sufficiently conservative for the outset of the budget process.
So Kevin, as far as our base tax, our property tax levy, are we seeing any increases in industrial? We had taken some actions, some new articles, some new stuff we had done. Are we seeing any increase because of that in the industrial space?
Well, I think that the commercial development, the residential development has continued to keep pace or outpace commercial development in town. Certainly there is new commercial growth that's included and currently underway. Some of that's currently being built, like the 350,000 square feet of warehouse space at Centec North, the formerly town-owned land. There's some ongoing construction at 420 Boston Turnpike, which is McGovern Auto Group, and Floor and Decor Retail Center, which will be about 63,000 square feet. And then going through permitting right now is the Patrick Motor Group, major new VW facility that'll be at the corner of South and Route 9. And then a little bit behind that in the permitting process, but at the state E&F, is the redevelopment of the Worcester Sand and Gravel site with a proposed about 1.5 million square feet of commercial warehouse space there. So as I said at the beginning, when you add 250 apartments in a pretty much a single year, and the traditional normal amount of about 30 single-family homes, the percentages really aren't shifting. So we're still at about 87% residential and 13% commercial as far as our tax base goes.
Any other questions or comments?
So,
Please.
Kevin, so are you saying like that base tax levy 87% is residential and 13% is commercial?
That's the general numbers, yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
And what's the growth rate that we assume in our calculations, like year over year or last 5 years? What?
Well, so we're projecting, I don't know if you can do the math backwards off of 955,000 from the tax levy. So, we're projecting $955,000 in new growth. So that's, I can't really do the math off the top of my head, but that has roughly, about an $80 million new real value to it. So, it's incremental, it's steady, it's strong, so, I'd have to do the math to make sure that's exactly right, but it's somewhere around there.
Is that new growth, that's a mix of residential and
It
commercial?
is, yep.
Do we have an idea of what the residential piece of that growth would be?
Well, specifically, we're looking at a number of projects that are currently working their way through permitting. And that includes, most mature is we're expecting a permit to be pulled for the 92 units at the Point at Stony Hill Farm. And kind of next in line behind that is the 200 or so units at 409 South Street, which is a 55 plus. Now that project has been temporarily paused by the developer for potential economic conditions, but they haven't completely pulled the plug on it yet. And then the other thing that we would anticipate is the mixed-use development permits being pulled for 1 through 7 Maple Avenue at the former Beal site within this fiscal year. So those are the major projects.
Okay.
Mr. Batten?
Quick question, Kevin. In reference to commercial, you will not draw the full tax burden on those until they're fully occupied.
That's right, yep. Yeah,
I think that's very important to know that even though they're up and running, until they've got tenants in there, there's
correct. That's a good point, thank you.
So we don't realize that till 2024 expectedly?
Well, I mean, I think the clearest example of that would be if you look at Centec North and that 350,000 square feet of warehouse space, there's only 60,000 square feet of it actually rented right now. So there is value on the rest of the vacant, but it's not the full value because it is done on a lease cash basis. So the developer, if we were to try to tax it at its full value of being fully leased, they would appeal that. So we'd be conservative until they get it fully leased out.
So just follow up on that. So do we charge anything for non-occupancy?
Yep, absolutely. There's a value there that we do assess. Yep.
And then one more, if I may ask the follow-up. So as we grow more on residential, have we seen any correlation with, like the students enrolling into schools or any other services across the departments that increase, but at the same time strain, other resources? Have we seen?
Yeah, I mean, I think the clearest example that I can provide is we have 22 new students at the apartments at the Market Basket development. So we do track that really closely. We anticipated up to 28 students. So, we're within the range. We do an annual calculation that's done by Kristen Lass, and she manages that. So it's something that we do keep our eye on. If you look at a project like that, the multifamily project, it's certainly the school students, do have an impact. But as far as other services, there's police and fire or something, we always respond to. But as far as comparing those 250 units to 250 single-family homes in a subdivision, it's night and day. A lot less cost to the town on a higher density development like that. There's no trash collections, things like that.
Yep. Thank you.
All right. Keep going? Okay. So second largest revenue category is state aid. And of course, the by and far largest aspect of state aid is school aid, which comes under Massachusetts General Laws, Chapter 70. We've increased the school aid by $30 per pupil, and that's been the minimum increase that we've seen over the past few years by the state when they've adjusted school aid. Now this year it was actually double that. It's $60 per student, but we of course are conservative at this point in the budget process. We've also increased the second highest category, which is known as general government aid or unrestricted aid or lottery aid, it may be referred to. And we increased that a little less than 1%. So although state aid is our second largest category, and the Proposition 2.5 allows us to increase property taxes by 2.5%, not every category sees significant increases, which strains our ability to do new things. And state aid is one of those categories, especially it being our second largest. There's not a lot of growth in it.
Is that because of the formulas that the state uses?
Yeah, it's because of the formulas that the state uses and the positions that we find ourselves in, mainly relative to Chapter 70 school aid and how that formula is conducted. So still a significant amount of money that comes in, $25 million, but it's rather flat and doesn't allow us even to account for cost of living and inflationary pressures that we see. It doesn't ever keep pace with that.
Ennis, please.
What are the hindrances to Shrewsbury for the Chapter 70 funding? I mean, I know it's gone down from where it used to be.
Yep.
And I just think if anyone's watching,
Yep.
it'd be interesting if they could find out what is hindering us.
Yeah, so I'm not an expert on Chapter 70, but I can provide the high-level analysis of it. It simply lies in the fact of the town's perceived general economic conditions and wealth and our own ability to pay for students and how that works out in the formula. So if you look at the formula that they use for Chapter 70, we're already receiving more than the formula would yield on its own. So the state has always held towns like Shrewsbury harmless, who receive more aid than the new formula that went into place about 12 years ago provides. And we receive what's called minimum aid. And over the years, that's normally been a minimum of 30 and a maximum of, 60 to 80 in any given year. So we do receive more aid year over year from Chapter 70, but it's not, as some may see who are still receiving more of a benefit of the formula itself. All right. So again, those are the two main categories.
Carlos has a question.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Sorry, just
Yeah.
continuing off of
Yeah.
the previous question. I was curious if the recommendation is taking into account the recent passage of Question 1, and do we anticipate any sort of increase in Chapter 90 or 70 with that question?
It certainly has, that wasn't, there's no consideration for that, and I haven't really heard anything on what the plans would be for that and whether it would further benefit. We know in the long run with the most recent legislation passed reforming educational aid that in areas like transportation, we would really benefit if the state was able to fund at the level provided, but perhaps the result of Question 1 will benefit the town. I just haven't really seen anything put on paper yet.
Thank you.
All right. Keep going. Utility revenue is very much still a work in progress at this point in the year. With regards to both water and sewer, the Department of Public Works and actually Mr. Snowden's working on some analyses of the water and sewer rates. The water rates were last adjusted for July 1st of 2018, and they were set for a 5-year cycle, which means that we need to study them for this upcoming July. As we go through that process, which would go through the select board, we'll keep the finance committee advised and invite you to any hearings on those matters. one of the challenges of the recent inflation that we've seen in the country is impacting utilities, of course, and water and sewer chemicals that we use in the treatment process. And then, of course, the associated costs of capital improvements and construction. They probably have had the largest impact of any inflationary measure, especially in the water chemicals area, where we're looking at increases of over 2 or 3 times what we budgeted even for fiscal year '23. So that's something that we need to look at to ensure we have enough revenue to keep those critical operations going, so this may be adjusted. We have also received notice that, or an estimate that due to the increases in National Grid and our sewer treatment plant being located in Westboro in a National Grid territory, that utility bill will go up about $250,000 a year just because of the rate increases that we've seen there. So it's significant, and we'll have to take a look at these revenues as we move forward in the budget process. The Cable Public Access Fund is an enterprise fund where we receive dollars earmarked through a cable franchise agreement with Selco and provide them to SMC. We've documented those funds here. You will note that it is a declining number year over year as individuals cut the cord and move away from landline cable service. That's where the fees are generated for this enterprise fund. I will also note that the cable franchise agreement is currently under renegotiation, and a new agreement has to be in place by this March. So these numbers are subject to change. It's a very collegial negotiation with Selco, where we're trying to maintain dollar values across all aspects of pilot funding and franchise fee funding that we receive from Selco as a department.
Is the fiber optic push affecting any of this at all?
It doesn't, well, it's probably driving more people to cut the cord. We don't receive any benefit from internet subscribers when it comes to funds that get transferred from Selco to the town. We do negotiate payment in lieu of taxes for the value of the infrastructure and equipment that Selco has. So that's what we're really looking to balance, how much you receive in a pilot agreement from them versus how much we had been receiving on the cable side. The cable side, even when it was negotiated 10 years ago, was obviously in a very different position as a business than it is right now. So it's a little bit of uncertainty, but negotiations thus far, we're looking to come out kind of the same bottom line numbers, but just different sources.
And is that being offset by the internet, the fiber revenue that they're getting?
Well, so that's what I'm saying. So internet subscriptions and internet services, we don't have the ability to receive a franchise fee for those. So they don't have any impact. So the reason we receive a cable franchise fee per subscriber is because of federal communications law that provides that opportunity, but we don't receive that for internet subscriptions.
I have one question.
Yep.
Since we don't receive anything from the fiber, the cable side of it, or the internet side of it, does that mean that we could also bring another internet company in to compete and charge them some type of fee to come in?
We could. I mean, they have that opportunity right now. So the only thing that we license kind of, which gets a monopoly is the cable part of the business. So each community is allowed to select one cable subscriber. You could have more than one. Some communities did, have Charter, and then Verizon came in and overlaid FiOS. So technically, the community is always subject to another internet service provider. I think Selco's biggest threat at this point is 5G, and whether 5G as a platform is able to outstrip the capacity of fiber. 5G itself needs fiber backhaul, so we're in a good position since we have that infrastructure in place as Cellco to, still get money even if Verizon and other companies do overlay the communities with small cell. Honestly, that's one of the things that we want to make sure Cellco stays competitive in the fiber business, and its price points are adequate that customers still buy it and don't seek other means. But, I'm not an expert in IT or these things, but, there's also Starlink, that's a satellite-based, Elon Musk company where, right now you can pay $700 for a platform and $110 a month and receive satellite internet at your home in this area as well. So there's a lot of competitors out there. It's a competitive market in the IT field that everyone knows about, but, try to stay as competitive as we can.
So just one more question about the cable public access funds. What are those, is there a particular place that generally goes?
It all goes to Shrewsbury Media Connection.
Okay.
So it's just a pass-through on our books to document that we received that fee from Cellco, and then it goes for sole use by the nonprofit that is Shrewsbury Media Connection now.
Okay,
Yep.
thank you.
Okay. Moving on to local receipts, which is our third largest revenue category. We are proposing an increase from 11.965 to 12,355,000. I will remind you that we received just about $13.4 million in actual revenue. You can see there for fiscal year 22 and 13.1 for the year before that. We always take a conservative stance with local receipts, really for two reasons. We're purposefully trying to generate free cash, which is, partially made up of local receipts that come in excess of budget, to maintain at least 5% of the operating budget being generated through free cash, which we have been successful in doing. It's especially important to do as we continue to build our general stabilization fund and get it up into our policy range of at least 5% of the overall operating budget. In addition, this is very elastic and subject to general economic conditions, and that's clearly evident in what has happened with the auto industry and motor vehicle excise tax that you'll see from fiscal year 19 through fiscal year 22, where we've had a steady decline in the total actual motor vehicle excise tax receipts that we've received. Those supply chain and other issues in the motor vehicle industry obviously is limiting the purchase of new cars, which is kind of the big driver of keeping that number increasing year after year. So we have reduced that, but we do still anticipate an overall increase and feel that the receipts historically provide us an opportunity to do that. Not a lot of other changes, no substantial changes, I don't think, in any category. Licenses and permits is a growing category, but we do see a lot of economic activity and permits being pulled, and those major development projects do continue to come. We do anticipate some of them landing within fiscal year 24, as we mentioned. Happy to answer any questions.
What are the remaining revenue sources? Because a little bit of a decrease in that, about 100,000 to 140 odd.
Yeah, so we have those detailed out. I just need to take a look. Yeah, it was on the bottom of the next page. I'll just keep going. There it is. Is it the white? them up.
Got like E-rate.
It's the Silco pilot, some miscellaneous recurring special assessments as a category.
So like, yeah, so the
Solar.
orange area on your sheet that you have, here's that orange?
Yellowish.
Yellow is
Amber.
orange, something like that.
And there is a substantial increase in interest income, about 30%. Is that because of some of the increase in penalties in town, or that we passed last town meeting?
No, it's not really associated with that. It would be just higher short-term yields on things like our money market accounts and things like that, now that there is actually some interest being created in those simple accounts where we haven't seen it for like a decade or so. So, but that's primary. We do have, it's a significant amount of money kind of like in the float of our checking account that we do receive interest off of. It's just a reflection of that and working with our financial advisor.
This special assessments is where the major decrease was.
Jim has a question.
Supplementary taxes, sorry.
Kevin,
Yep.
could you comment a little bit on the landfill and kind of where we are there? If I'm not mistaken, I believe, are we near end of life on that or end of cycle?
Yeah, we're nearing end of cycle on that. The last we heard was 2028 through 2030, so they have extended the life over what it originally was, but at this point, there is a life cycle end to it once they fill the volume that they've been permitted to fill. We've actually asked them for a recent reconciliation and an update on where they are on that, so we can provide that to the committee coming up in December. But you're right, yeah. So it is a $1.5 million revenue source. In the grand scheme of things, it's significant enough that we need to pay attention to if we're gonna lose it entirely.
Yeah, it looks like it's what, top three anyways, right?
Yeah.
Over the last several years. Okay, thank
Yep.
you.
Jane?
Kevin, I'd like to ask on this investment income, what
Mhm.
was the previous year?
The previous year is $1,900,000.
Way down. Is
Yeah.
this a combination of between the town and the retirement, or is that both separate?
Separate, no retirement,
Okay.
no retirement funds here.
Could I do one follow-up?
Absolutely.
Where is the government money we received? And how
The
was
American
that-
Rescue Plan Act,
Yeah, how is it moved into the budget itself?
there's none of it is in this budget at all. It's held all separately in separate funds and it isn't intermingled. It's not subject to appropriation by town meeting, but the Board of Selectmen is presenting their spending plan right now tentatively on December 13th. So it's all separate and outside of this.
Now, all that money can't be spent in the upcoming year. It's spread over a number
No.
of years?
No, there's no limitation on how fast we can spend it. We do have all $11.5 million on hand, except for what we spent. We do have to spend it by, there's 2 dates really, December 31st of 2024. The funds at least all have to be obligated and put under contract for a particular purpose. And regardless, they all have to be completely expended by December 31st of 2026.
One follow-up question unrelated to anything that's on the agenda or anything. At the last special town meeting, there was an indication about the Hale building being leased out. Now, that building has been sold, and now the school department has a lease on it?
The Hale Drug Building, the Walgreens?
Yes.
That's correct. They're working through a lease process after an RFP, yes.
Where is that money coming from?
That's a self-generating program and special, so they'll generate revenue from the site, and it's part of the special education program that is, I'm not 100% sure if some of those funds are in their operating budget or if it's state-funded special education programs. but we can get
Will
that.
be
for-
able to provide more detail
Yeah.
on that?
Yeah, Mr. Collins would be able to, or Dr. Sawyer
Yep.
could. Yep,
Thank you.
sure. Okay, any other local receipts questions? Sorry.
All good.
Okay. Just another quick look at local receipts over the years. On the left side of the screen, blue line's budget, red's actual. So just the trend where we're always seeking to bring in more money than we budget for the purposes that I've described. And then just a historic comparison of total receipts on the right-hand side of the screen from fiscal year 19 to what we're budgeting for fiscal year 24. Free cash is, something that we talk about a lot with the committee. Free cash was certified at a little over $9.1 million for the end of, as of, July 1st of this year, based upon the closeout of the fiscal year 22 books. As a number, that's the largest certified free cash that we've ever had, but it continues to be around 5 to 6% of the annual operating budget, which is our policy. Free cash certainly is a reserve asset of the community. It's looked favorably upon by bond rating companies as just that, a liquid reserve of the community to be used as needed and in times of need. We set aside free cash each and every year to build our general stabilization account, which is our permanent emergency rainy day fund, and to fund our annual capital improvement budget somewhere around $1.6 to $2 million annually. So we will draw down upon free cash. We've provided an estimate of $2.6 million, and that's subject to change as we look at those capital needs of the community and what we think we can fairly put into general stabilization fund without eroding the free cash base, but building the general stabilization as fast as we can. So happy to answer any questions about this, but
Is the free cash one of the parameters in the formula that reduces our state aid?
I'm sorry, say that again?
Does free cash have any effect on the state aid that we receive?
It does not, nope,
Does not,
no impact. Finally, we have put, under the general laws, we're allowed to use various sources of funding to just otherwise offset the tax rate, which means we're using revenue that we're not raising through taxation for various operating and capital purposes. You will note that historically we've received the $800,000 from cable TV and $237,000 as a pilot payment for the value that's out there in real property for the municipal light plant, and that number hasn't been looked at in quite some time. And free cash, of course, is just free cash. Given my prior comments, we have kind of flipped the estimates that we receive from cable TV revenue and the municipal light payment in lieu of taxes. There'll also likely be a cable TV payment in lieu of taxes, which would be more on the internet side of things to tax those assets. So we, again, trying to build or at least hold steady the total value that we receive from Selco in those two categories. But as we go through this franchise agreement and the cable industry changes, we do need to make changes based upon that. So that's $1,537,000, which it has been. Again, as I talked about state aid and it not having growth to even keep up with 2.5% or 3% cost increases on an annual basis. This is a number that has remained the same, which kind of strains the total new dollars that are available with no growth in this category.
Just a quick question. If this changed, would you expect that the cost to Selco customers would increase?
Not necessarily. I can't fully answer that on the electric side. I think all things being equal, yes, right? Like if they were raising only the amount of revenue that they needed to break even, and then their payment in lieu of taxes on the electric side went up by $500,000, they'd have to build that through their rate structure. They have a lot of rules and regulations on how much profit they're allowed to make, quote unquote profit over, revenue over expenditures. I don't think that this amount of money, given that they're about a $60 million total enterprise, has a significant effect on either side. So I don't think that it's gonna overly influence what they need to do when you take into consideration just the general factors like energy supply costs and personnel and things like that.
Thank you.
Right, and then other available funds are just sources that we receive particular purposes, and their associated expenditures are defined or limited. So we always transfer about $18,000 for the sale of cemetery lots to help offset the cost of maintaining the cemetery. With regards to the funds that you see for both light revenue and cable TV revenue, those are specific amounts associated with their debt service obligations, which we maintain on our side of the books. And then the cable public access fund is just repeated here on this slide. It is an in and an out. So in total, other available funds are a little less than $1.9 million.
The cable TV debt service, that's related to the fiber?
That is the fiber project,
Yeah.
correct? Yep.
And do we know how many years we?
That's a 20-year borrowing. Yep, and it's declining debt service, as you see there. So it'll continue to go down over the years.
Thank you.
Ask one quick question in reference to the fiber optics. What percentage of the town is done?
It's still a rather low percentage. I think it's only around 20% or so right now. Big multi-year project, and of course, they have experienced supply issues with the fiber itself.
Have we seen any increase of, adoption? I know, as we go live with the fiber optics,
Mm-hmm.
We are offering that service
Mhm.
for, I don't know, like $10, $15 more.
Mm-hmm.
Have we seen any adoption
Uh,
in those areas where we have gone live?
I don't know the answer, but I can ask the Selco GM, for that. I'm not aware.
Okay.
I believe people are taking it as soon as it comes, but we can get the numbers for you.
Thanks.
That's all we have on the revenue manual.
Thank you.
Just go back to the original slide of total revenues in each category. I don't know if there's any other questions on this.
Can I go backwards just a little bit?
Sure.
You had mentioned earlier that we didn't do as big of a tax levy as we could have through Prop 2. This year. Does that impact what next year will be? Okay.
No, it doesn't harm us in any way. It keeps tax bills a little bit lower this year. But the state always allows you to start with whatever your maximum allowable levy would have been,
Okay.
not what you raised.
One quick question on state aid, right? I think within that, from a school, there is like a Chapter 70 school aid and there is unrestricted general government aid.
Mm-hmm.
Do we know how that breakdown look like and how do we use that?
So the breakdown is shown here on how it comes in with the 3.3 million in general aid and the 20 on the school aid side. We don't really track, in theory, the full $20 million goes to the school, right? Because that's the only place that's allowed to go. But, kind of, if you remember the master balance sheet, we, as a community, put all the revenue sources, in the top bucket and then expenditures in the bottom bucket. So we don't really track unless we have to, where these specific dollars go to. Now, like chapter 90 is only earmarked for capital improvements on roads, so we can only expend that on that, and it's spent outside of the operating budget through particular program parameters, but otherwise we don't really track at that level of detail the flow of revenue.
Okay.
Okay.
I think we're good. Thank you.
Okay, so if I could just comment real quick, so maybe Alex, can you just pull up the?
Yeah.
So I just wanted to share with the committee really briefly, so we do a 5-year financial forecast of the revenues and projected expenditures. I just want to share that with you real quick. This is in draft form, but, you know, rather confident, and I'm sorry, it's rather hard to see. I don't know, can you just maybe hit download and then pull the PDF up?
This isn't on the Google Drive, correct?
It is
It
not.
is.
It is.
Oh,
Yeah.
it is?
It is,
I just
yes.
opened it up.
Is there?
Max MBS FY 2024.
Yep.
Like Max PDF.
So, just try to explain this document. So the top part of the document that you can kind of see here on the screen is the revenue model that we're using. So we're using actuals for fiscal year 22 and 23 and projections for fiscal year 24 through fiscal year 28 in this model. And so we're conservative in our use of revenue. The revenue that's identified here for the forecast is slightly different than what I just presented. It's a little bit less, but that's because I needed to hold some things constant in the utility revenue, just to make sure that we're not overestimating certain types of categories there. So my main exercise for this is to understand the duration of level budgets given the current financial model and the operating override that was put in place in fiscal year 21. So I'm using conservative estimates on the revenue side, the maximum allowable tax levy limits, and then pretty much conservative numbers throughout the rest of it. So I'll just slide down to the bottom of this real quick. So down here on the bottom, you can see that I'm trending in this model, education, municipal, shared operating support, and debt service expenses over that same period of time. Those individual 4 categories are all being trended in this model under the minimum percentage increase that the select board and the school committee agreed through their commitment to the community during the override. So therefore, the education line item is being trended at 4.25% a year. The municipal line item is being trended at 3.5% a year. Shared operating support is being trended at 6.65% a year, and then debt service has been set at the actual requirements associated with our current debt service schedule. The blue line that you see there, transfer to override stabilization, represents money that we're placing into the override stabilization fund through this revenue model. And you can see that under this model, with the available revenues that we're projecting for fiscal year 24, and if we were to spend at those lowest thresholds that are available, we'd be able to put almost, $1.75 million into the override stabilization and still have a balanced budget. I have also trended these numbers out based upon the highest expenditure authorization, which is an additional 0.5% in both the education and municipal categories. And even with that, we would contribute about $1 million to the override stabilization for fiscal year '24. The trends start to change as we get out to fiscal year '27. If you assume the highest each and every year, you begin to go into deficit. In fiscal year '27, if you remain at the lowest expenditures each and every year, you don't go into deficit until fiscal year '28. So again, this is the lowest model that's being shown on the screen, and you can see that we're predicting a $3.5 million deficit in fiscal year '28. Those numbers there across the bottom of the screen are the number of years associated with the current override. The select board had committed and school committee committed to at least 4 years without asking the question. And again, at this model, assuming these revenues and expenses, you can see that this revenue model projects a balanced budget through 6 years after the initial override was passed. And the other model, it actually brings that $3.5 million over 1 year to fiscal year '27. So it shortens it up by 1 year. So right now, we're still, as we committed to last year, able to commit to at least 5 years under this model. And that trend is moving in a favorable direction, where even with higher than minimum expenditures, the number is getting lower for the 6th year. At this point, I just wanted to share those general highlights with the committee to let them know that we're still in a very strong position from this override. We still are contributing funds, plan to contribute funds into the stabilization account and not withdraw any. But withdrawals from the the Special Purpose Stabilization Fund may begin as soon as the following year, fiscal year '25. But doing so would be, the first drawdown in what we anticipated being the last year of the current cycle when we did our original model. So a lot of economic growth has happened in town. The tax base has really increased. It's almost $8 billion at this point. And local receipts have certainly rebounded, but we're keeping our eye on them given economic conditions this year. So we'll keep our eye on this, but all in all, really strong numbers, favorable conditions, and at least gives us something to work with regards to expenditure models, even at this highest level. So happy to answer any questions you may have, but just wanted to share that with you.
2 questions I had, Kevin. So the 3 million, almost 3.5 million deficit, so that mostly corresponds to education, right, in 2028?
Well, it's hard to
Majority comes from that.
it's hard to say where it comes from. It's just really showing, kind of bottom line. If you were, again, in this model, to spend at those percentages year after year after year, that's the end result, is a deficit that's showing up again in 2028.
Okay.
A lot of things will change between now and then, and as you know, if we're fortunate to have at least moderate economic conditions, with the conservative nature of this revenue model that we use, as I sit here today, I would think that deficit would go away, by the time that we got there, but, it's a long way away and a lot can change.
Right.
So,
And that leads to my second question. Does the Fair Share Act have any impact on us?
it's not being reflected at all in this. And I don't really understand how it's going to impact how the state will adjust the education model and formula or any aspect of transportation where it may benefit municipalities. I just don't know that at this point.
Diana?
Yeah, so another question, given the challenges we've talked about with inflation, you talked about chemical utilities, is that leading us more towards that maximum increase, or you're not sure yet?
I think it will push us there, yeah. I mean, it's going to be a challenge, to deal with these cost increases. On the municipal side, under the agreement, the maximum allowable increase was 4%, and certainly general inflationary trends are nearly double that. So in order to be competitive as employer with wages and manage those particular costs, things like fuel, you know, which we go out to bid for on an annual basis, which happens to be due, you know, the end of the calendar year. We'll be challenged to stay within those caps, but, you know, that's what we're charged with, and we'll produce a budget associated with it.
Gene?
Yeah. Kevin, there's gotta be a factor you're using for this inflation. Somewhere along the line, there's gotta be a percentage here going forward. Have you got an overall factor you're using?
In these numbers here on the slides?
Yeah.
Well, so, the line items here, so the education line item is trended up 4% per year. And the municipal line is trended up 3.5% per year. Shared operating support 6.65, and then debt service is what it is. So those are the increases, but nothing
Those were
else.
decided on during the override.
Those were the minimums that we were
Right.
allowed, yeah.
What I'm asking the question right now is, the present budget going forward,
Mm-hmm.
we've got to have a factor we're using with the way the economy and everything is going in general. What is that factor?
Yeah, we haven't determined it yet. We haven't applied it, so we haven't started the submission of the budget yet. We're asking all departments now to be going out and understanding what their pricing currently is and asking their vendors to project it forward. But the number that's shown here for fiscal year '24 doesn't have anything beyond that 3.5 or 4%. that's shown.
The reason I ask is,
Yep.
we still share with the fuel for the city of Worcester.
Yep.
Okay, and we have other joint adventures we go out with, and National Grid's announced
Yep.
outrageous prices. Eversource has announced outrageous
Yep.
percentages, and
Yep.
it's not the 10 or 12%, it's some,
Right.
they're talking 30, 60% some
Yeah.
on these. So
Yeah,
that's-
no, we will definitely factor that all in when we develop the budget, but I haven't really kind of gone crazy with it yet, knowing that we'll have to trim if we have to trim in certain areas, so, yeah.
Dennis?
This is just the revenue part that you're trending here. You're not trending any of the expenses,
Well, I'm trending expenses on the bottom of this, but just at a very
general.
general level. Yep, correct.
One question, I know we have certain factor for new growth, right? And our schools are at capacity today.
Mm-hmm.
So have we like factored in, when we talk about, the education trend that you have
Mm-hmm.
factored in here? And does that go against the override that we did overall? Because I know historically, there were a couple of overrides asked only for specific school purpose, so
Mm-hmm.
just want to,
So there's nothing additional beyond either the 4% or 4.5% cost of education that's being shown here. Those numbers were all derived off of 20-year averages whenever we built the override. So we have high level of confidence over the long term that those numbers are sufficient, in the average year. Now, not every year is average, and sometimes we'll be challenged. We do assume major capital improvement projects would be excluded from Proposition 2.5. So therefore, if you're looking at another major school construction project, those dollars would be raised outside of Prop 2.5, and taxes would go up to cover that, just like we're allowed to do. So we don't really need to trend those type of expenses through the operating budget based upon that assumption that there's no way to fund it within the levy limit, so we'd have to go outside of it.
One more question.
Yes, please.
It's, as far as costs and expenses for employees going forward, do we have any, union contracts coming up anytime soon, or are we locked? I think the teachers just
Yep.
did one, so they're locked in for a few years at least. Is that,
Yep, that's correct.
so how many years before one of those goes up for renewal?
So, on the town side this year, for the end of the end of the fiscal year is firefighters contract. Everything else is settled at least for, 1 or 2 years beyond that, so we're in the first or second year of a 3-year cycle. Teachers have been settled, so this is the first year of a new 3-year cycle, so they're in a good spot as well, as far as being able to predict costs. We'll get into this in the budget process, but I think one of the biggest challenges on the school side is that this is a renewal year for transportation, school bus services.
Now, one more question on that. I know during COVID, we kept some school bus services, or paying for some school bus services. I'm hoping that will be used as some leverage coming back.
Yeah,
That
we do have a really good relationship
Yep.
with AA Transportation, yep.
Any more questions? Diana?
I realize we're very early in the process and these are all projections, but has there been any discussion about, revisiting that agreement of the percentage of the override, given the, the costs and things like that, right?
Yes.
Because we will make the promised 4 to 5 years, even if we did a larger increase potentially.
Not yet. I mean, I think that will be something that would be on the table after we get that first look at departmental budget submissions and school as well. So, yes.
All good.
Okay.
you.
Thank you all very much. Appreciate the questions and talking with you all on these things. The only other thing on the manager's report this evening is included in your drive, which is the budget schedule. And a couple things really associated with that, and kind of blending into the next item, which is your meeting schedule, if I may. We don't foresee any significant business for December 15th at this point. We'll only be about a week and a half into receiving departmental budget submissions and in that open period. There could be a need, like a reserve fund transfer or something that we don't foresee right now, but right now we don't foresee any business at this point in time. Definitely January and February and there beyond will be into significant budget conversations and discussions that we'll be engaging with you on. And then I would just ask Mr. Chair if, the committee could send us any feedback on those March 23rd and 25th, which is a Thursday and Saturday dates for your main budget hearings. If there, we would like to kind of get a head count and make sure all, and if not all, then the vast majority of you are available for those critical dates.
So the March 23rd meeting is a Thursday evening,
That's
correct?
Yep.
And we generally start around 6?
Yes,
6
6
p.m.
o'clock.
to around
Yep.
3-4 hours till 3
Yeah, we
hours?
normally schedule things through 9:30 or so.
6 to 9,
Yeah.
6 to 9:30.
6 to 9:30.
Yeah.
Does anybody have any issues with that date and that time?
If you need to check schedules, if we could just kind of hear from you over the course of the next 3 or 4 weeks, best that you know at that point, that'd be great. We'll certainly revisit it again in January, but it'd be helpful to know if there's anything major right now.
And even the March 25th one, that's Saturday, we start around 8 a.m.?
Yep.
8 a.m. to
Yeah,
around 3.
8:30, yep,
8
something like
a.m.
that.
to 3.
Mhm.
So it's like a full day.
It's, yeah, a full day meeting.
Yep.
We probably will have to have another meeting, Kevin, in which we review the finance committee report on the budget. Or is
Yeah,
that
so
gonna-
right, so then, once we would get into April, we'd review the warrant and the finance committee report and all that stuff.
Okay.
But, Yeah,
That's post the budget hearing?
yes, correct, yep.
So to cancel the December 15th, 2022 meeting, do we have to have a motion or?
No, I think we just leave it as is right now, and if we may, we'll just communicate with you and let you know if something does come up, or if we don't have anything, and then we would cancel. So just, right now, we're trending towards cancel, but we'll let you know.
Sounds good.
It's a payback later.
What's that?
It's a payback later.
On the budget. So I guess that covers section 4A2 and 5 of the agenda.
Yes.
We are done. Okay, thank you, Kevin. We'll move on to item number 6 on the agenda, which is the correspondence that we received. The first is basically a letter to the Finance Committee from James F. Kane, the town moderator, regarding Jean Budenhagen's Finance Committee appointment letter dated October 17th, 2022. The second one is an email to the Finance Committee from our state rep, Hannah Kane, regarding the local economic development funding dated November 6, 2022. Are there any comments on the correspondence that we received?
Yeah, I think one question is like, how does that, funding slide into any of our projections, if any?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear.
The letter from Hannah
Yeah.
Kane, the local economic development funding. So how does that factor in?
So state grants are held outside of the operating budget and earmarked to us for particular purposes, so they don't have any influence, but perhaps taking something off the capital improvement plan list that we'd have otherwise had to fund with local dollars. So, short answer, no.
Okay, so that completes item number 6 on the agenda. We shall move to adjournment. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
A second?
Second.
All in favor of adjournment, please say aye.
Aye.
All against, say nay. The motion passes. Thank you for your participation.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.